Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Very briefly, one pointer on each one of the previous lessons. Lesson number one, we discovered the difference between godly soul or the animal soul motivating the human or running the show. Animal soul is all about me. I'm in the center. What's in it for me? Friendship is all motivated by what am I going to gain? Godly soul, on the other hand, is there for the purpose, for the goal, for the reason God created us, and therefore we should seek to have good relationship with our surroundings, siblings, spouses, partners, membership at a club or neighborhood, because that's what God wants me to do. We also discovered the art of empathy. Empathy versus sympathy is where I try to care for the other and allow him space. And we discovered the story of Joseph in jail, never forgot to pay attention to its surrounding. So when the two ministers one day woke up and they looked in a very strange, it bothered them to a point that he's trying to help them. Lesson two, we discovered the art of listening. Listening not just because I want to hear something new, listening not because someone is going to share with me something I don't know, but just allowing the other person to express for the purpose of bonding. This was, to me, the most important component of the lesson. Lesson number three, last week. What did we talk about last week? We talked about the creation. Remember, there is good the first day. There is no good when there is separation. In other words, the art of disagreement. We discovered some myths. One of them is that if there is a disagreement, we must iron it out. Judaism says, put it aside, forget about it. Concentrate on what works and what you agree upon. We also discovered that when there is disagreement, it can lead to a much stronger bond when we show respect for another's opinion and we're not trying to change them and we're not trying to impose my understanding or my political view, etc., but show them that they have their own and we still love them and care. So this way, that bond is much, much stronger than before we had the argument. And I showed examples. Today, we are about to disembark on the art of positivity. We are going to speak about what happens when a partner or a person we are in a relationship with misbehaves. How do we judge them internally? And I'll get back to it later, what internally is. In other words, how do we have a positive spin onto anything that somebody else does, even if it's not right? There was, very briefly, I shared that story once on Yom Kippur, so some of you may have heard. There was a rabbi of a community who traveled for a vacation or for a wedding to Israel, and a member of the congregation died. So they decided to ask the rabbi from the nearby town to come and officiate at the funeral. The rabbi didn't know the member that died, came to the funeral home and got up, went to the podium and started speaking. And he says, this man who just died was a very kind, nice man. He was a very loving family member. And he, I'm sure, provided all the family's needs. And all the way in the back, a lady gets up and says, excuse me, Rabbi, this man and his wife have been in court for the last 12 years. And she is claiming that he's physically abusing her. So what are you saying? So the rabbi says, okay, so I am sure that this man, since I see so many scholars in the room, was a Torah scholar and he came to Torah classes. And that same lady gets up and says, Rabbi, he did not show up to synagogue for the past 5 years. So he thinks to himself, he says, this man must have been doing tzedakah. He must have been very charitable, very kind to others, sharing his resources and his help with others. And the lady gets up and says, I'm sorry, Rabbi, this man is a very stingy man. He wouldn't even spend for himself, on himself, let alone helping others. He's not a kind man. So finally, the rabbi realizes that no matter what he says, it's not going to work. So the rabbi turned to the crowd and said, is there anyone who can say something good about this person? And that old lady gets up, raises her hand and gets up, and she says, yes, I have something good to say about him. His brother was worse than him. Oh. And here is another one for those of you who heard that before. Sammy is trying to catch a taxi. And as he raises his hand, a taxi stopped by. As he enters the taxi, the driver turns to him and says, perfect timing. Just when I was looking for a customer, I found you. Just like Saul. Saul was always perfect. He always got everything at the right time, the right place. And the man turned to him, Sammy turned to the driver, he said, Saul, what about Saul? And the driver says, Saul, unlike me, was a perfect human being. He had very heavy, big muscles. He could have played at the 49ers on a football team. And everything he touched was great, just not like me. Because when he wanted to learn, had to fix the electrical wires, he picked it up by himself. When I have to change a light bulb, the entire neighborhood loses power. And Sam says, look, you listen, not everybody is perfect. I can understand that, electrical is not your cup of tea. And the man says, no, you don't get it. You don't understand. Saul was perfect. He remembered everyone's birthdays, everyone's anniversaries. I don't even remember my own anniversary. So the Sammy, the customer turned to the driver and says, so where did you meet, how and where did you meet Saul? And the driver says, meeting Saul? I never met Saul. So the Sammy says to the driver, so how do you know Saul? He says, well, I married his widow. So we're going to talk about tonight the phenomena that's called negativity bias. Negativity bias is very well-known phenomena. I don't want to delve in too deep. The first two texts talk about it. We have it in a presentation. I'm going to share it with you by heart to save time. Negativity bias tells us that if I did 5 times I was very kind to you, and 1 time I was not kind to you, you will remember the unkindness. The ratio is 1 to 5 or even more. In other words, and it plays out in many ways. If I am in a relationship with my brother or sister, and I disrespected them 1 time, for them to reverse and continue the relationship like before will take at least 5 good acts. But when it comes to good deeds, they get forgot, they get lost. So what happens when I have an interview to find a new employee, a teacher, and a secretary, a builder? It takes only 3.8 negative points to disqualify. How many positive it takes to qualify? 8.8. In other words, it's more than double. So when I'm sitting with someone I never met, and I start speaking to them, and one thing they said, not good for me. Another one, 3, less than 4 points, And I say, that's not my, I don't want to hire them. When it comes to positive, before I say yes, it will take 8.8, almost 9 points that have to qualify. Way harder. And I shared again, I gave a whole talk about that. A professor in college once came in the morning to class and he says, today I'm going to give you a very special test. He handed out a paper to each one of the students. The paper was empty. There was no words, except in the center of the paper, there was a black dot. And he said to them, I want you to write a thesis on the paper I just handed you. And they all wrote about the size of the dot, the ratio to the paper, where is the dot, is it exactly centered, why is it black and not red? And everybody had a whole write-up about the dot. When they all handed the papers back to him, he turned to them and says, you know, it's very funny. The paper is so large, the dot is so little, and that's the only thing you saw. That's the only thing you concentrated on and wrote about. You didn't write about the size of the paper. You didn't write about how many words can fit in the paper. All you look at is that black dot, and that's what you're focusing on. This is the human being. The human nature is there is so much good and there is so little bad, and that's what we're going to catch on. There is a reason for it. Can anybody guess why is it? Well, the reason is, by nature, if someone does something good to me, it's not going to put my life in danger. It's not going to hurt. But if someone is doing something bad to me, it puts my life at risk, and I want to run away. So by nature, we were trained over thousands of years to fear, to pay attention, to not skip, to not allow it to go under the bridge, because it might be something that hurts me or cause me hurt or punish me. When someone does something good, extra kindness, nice words, gift, so he did. And if he didn't do, I can still survive. But if someone says, I'm going to take away your job or I'm going to hurt you, now we feel, because it can hurt, it can affect us. So therefore, if a person will say kind words, if a spouse, a parent, a sibling, someone in the community, he's coming on time to synagogue every morning at 8 o'clock, but once a week he's 10 minutes late, that's the only thing people remember, even though it's wrong. And we're going to discover ways to fight it. Because I don't need to do that exercise. I'm sure you can agree. In a relationship, any one of the four, if you relate to somebody and you want to connect with them, then whenever nobody is perfect. Just like me, everybody else makes mistakes. We make mistakes, they make mistakes. We would like to be able to have a relationship despite the mistakes people do. And therefore, we need to learn how to overcome negativity bias. There is one other thing. We call it fundamental attribution error. I'm giving you the introduction, so when you read it, you watch it on the video, you'll be able to hear it a second time. Fundamental attribution error means if someone is cutting through traffic or is driving, there is a traffic jam, everybody is backed out and everybody is backing out, and someone is driving by the shoulders, what's the first thing that goes through our mind?
You're not getting ahead of me.
You're not going to get ahead of me. What a jerk. Why am I following the rules and he's breaking the rules, right?
Because everybody who gets in the car, they're in a race mode.
They're in a race mode, not everybody.
Most.
You think
Yeah.
most.
Yeah.
So whenever they go by their shoulders, the first thing that goes through our mind is this guy is cheating. He's trying to go ahead of the game of everybody else. But let me ask you something. Is this always the case?
My wife might be having a baby.
Perhaps he is rushing to the hospital. Maybe there is an emergency. He's a doctor and he was asked to go in ahead of the line to save someone in a car accident. Yet, we always I'm saying always because 99% of the time, we are going to judge them in a very negative way. So what happens when my wife or my children are late? The first thing I'll say to them, you're lousy, you're lazy, you don't keep your word. But maybe there was a good reason that if I were in their shoes, or if I knew that reason, I would admire them. However, the first train of thought that comes is to pass judgment in a negative way. And that's a second thing that we are going to deal with, because in a relationship, it's going to hurt the relationship, because no one is perfect. So if someone made up with a spouse or with community members to be at dinner at a certain given time, and they are late, the first thing you're going to think is they have no respect for me. But it's not necessarily so. Maybe they're trying to do something for you, and they are trying to help you. And I'm going to show you personal examples tonight as well. Here is the video presentation.
Have you ever wondered why we remember negative experiences more vividly than positive ones? It's due to a concept called negativity bias. Negativity bias is our tendency to focus more on negative events. It's why insults linger longer than compliments, and why bad news grabs our attention more than good news. This bias deeply affects how we judge others. For example, a study found that if an interviewer initially liked a candidate for a job, just 3.8 pieces of negative data about the candidate were needed to change their mind and reject the unlucky applicant. But it took 8.8 pieces of positive data, more than double, to shift an initial negative impression to a positive one. Negativity bias is rooted in our survival instinct. Ignoring good traits isn't dangerous, but overlooking bad traits might be. So we're wired to be on alert for negativity and to err on the side of caution. Now let's explore another concept that affects our judgment of others: fundamental attribution error. Imagine you're stuck in traffic and a driver cuts the line by riding the shoulder. Your instinctive reaction might be, "What an arrogant jerk." But that reaction is a classic example of the fundamental attribution error, where we overemphasize personality traits and downplay situational factors. Who says the driver is arrogant? Maybe they're rushing to a hospital, but our minds instinctively jump to internal attributions. That driver is entitled, instead of considering external situational factors. Of course, sometimes the person who behaves negatively does have negative characteristics or intentions, but research has shown that it's not nearly as often as people think. Understanding these two biases, both well documented by research, raises important questions. How do these biases affect our relationships? What can we do to reduce their impact? What do you think?
So again, I'm going to summarize. One hurdle or bump in the path of relationship, and it applies in all 4 circles of relationship. And I don't need to make an exercise, it's obvious to me. This is a mature crowd, you should be able to relate to every aspect of relationship. One is called negativity bias, which means they can be cooking for us every night, very delicious dinner. But once it got spoiled or burnt, and that's what to remember. He or she, a bad cook. They don't know how to cook because it's all burnt. But then you start going back and you realize it's only 5% of the time, 10%. You can't call somebody a bad cook. That's negativity bias. We are inborn with that trait to put emphasis on negativity and forget about the positive. That's why people say, "Oh, you're always late," or "You always speak up disrespectfully," even though they might do it only once a week. So when somebody tells me always, by the way, the first thing I ask him, when was the last time I did it? Other than now. Let's say I was late and somebody says, "You're always late." I says, "Can you remind me when was the time before?" "Oh, well, I'm sure it happened before." I said, "I'm sure it happened before too. But tell me when it happened." And that's when they stumble. The second issue is, what do we call that? fundamental attribution error, which states, and there is a study, and you all agreed to that, whenever we see someone not doing the right thing, we immediately judge them unfavorably. We immediately say, he's trying to break the law. He's trying to take a shortcut. He's going to take advantage of me. That's the natural way for responding. Tonight, we are going to divide the class into 3 parts. Number 1 is how to overcome negativity bias because it hurts the relationship. And we will learn how to have positivity bias. Number 2, we're going to talk about how to overcome fundamental attribution error and have a fundamental attribution error in a positive way. And the last part is we're going to learn that this is revealing the core, the essence of the human, which will help us understand how to apply it in a day-to-day life. I want to show you a story because that story I heard a couple of years ago, and I do think it's very appropriate. I heard it from a rabbi who himself experienced that. In Israel, as well as many other countries, every penny counts. You have a synagogue. Synagogues in Israel are run by public funding, and there is not enough funds. So, for example, in many towns in Israel, if you come to a synagogue and during summertime and you want to have an air conditioner, what do? You put a coin, a 5 shekel or 10 shekel, and it gives you 10 or 15 minutes of air conditioning. So always, if you have a minyan, you have a service, somebody will be the kind one, the charitable one to put in the coin for 15 minutes and then somebody else. That's the way it works because they can't afford air conditioning running all the time. So if they have a station for coffee, tea, and cold water, and they would have a sleeve of cold plastic cups. The Israeli plastic cups are very, very thin as they can find them, paper thin, and they are, let's say, 1 penny a cup. Then they have hot cups. The hot cups are made out of cardboard, right? And they put up a big sign, please use hot cups for coffee only. The cold drinks can be served with cold cups. This rabbi stood near the water. He sees one time a man walks in very quick. He's running in to catch the minyan and he's catching his breath. He's grabbing a hot cup and he's filling up cold water. The man turned to him, the rabbi turned to him and says, don't you realize what you've just done? There is a clear sign of here. The place is offering it to you for no charge. Somebody is kind enough to pay, to donate it. Why don't you follow the rules? And the man turned to the rabbi and he says, I actually follow the rules. I actually wanted to drink cold water and then drink a cup of coffee. And I figure instead of using 2 cups, I use the hot cup first for cold water. After I drink it, I'll make myself a coffee. This is called, no, that's the truth. Fundamental error, attribution error. The rabbi had judged them very quickly without taking into account that perhaps there is much more to the story than the way he assumes. He could have asked, he could have respected that person without calling to judgment. This is the topic of our discussion. Do I have to elaborate why it affects relationship or it's obvious? Is it obvious? Very good. So here are some slides. Negativity bias. We are going to naturally, because we fear for our safety, we're going to focus on shortcomings over strengths. So if I hire somebody, I'm looking to hire somebody who will take 3.8 points to reject the candidate. But if I hire somebody and there's only positive, it will take 8.8 points to hire. In other words, more than double to impress me rather than reject. Fundamental attribution error. is attribute behavior to either malicious intent or a character flaws. He's a bad person. He's trying to cut the line. He don't care about other people's energy and time. He thinks that he's the king of the road. This is fundamental attribution error, where people do not stop for a moment and say to themselves, perhaps he's cutting the line because he has a true emergency. But we right away go and do that. It's not going to help us in our relationship, and therefore we need to learn how to overcome it. So before we begin, we need to understand that if I'm walking from the animal soul is self-centered, egotistic. It's all about me. If someone did something bad for me, I push them away. I don't want to have to do with them. And therefore, negativity bias and fundamental attribution error from the animal soul is going to be expanded to the max. But from the godly soul cares about the relationship. So it's not worth making a fight. It's not worth speaking and remembering the negativity, and we want to let go. So if you want to allow for your relationship to grow and mature, you must allow the godly soul to be in charge. And everything we're going to be discussing tonight is going to be because we're allowing the godly soul to rule. I want to share just a minute what we're not going to be speaking about. In lesson 5, we're going to talk about guiding people to fix their flaws. How do I criticize? That's going to be next week, because there is a time that's my responsibility. Children in a community, we have to guide somebody. If my spouse wants to know what I like to eat, and if I don't like that type of food, I should be able to know how to relate, how to express that. Lesson number 5, we're going to talk about how to criticize. Lesson number 6, we're going to talk about how to reconcile after somebody hurts us. Somebody had hurted us. How do we reconcile? How do we reconnect? That's going to be 5 and 6. So we're not talking about outside of me. We're not talking about how to criticize him or her. We're not talking about how to fix what they did for us, how to relate to them that I'm hurt and they have done something wrong. This is not our topic tonight. We are concentrating on inward, me. I saw you spoil the food. I saw you were late to a meeting. How do I judge you? How do I look at it? I saw you running without saying hello this morning to me. How do I be able to continue on without having the fundamental error attribution? Without saying to you, you don't like me, you don't appreciate what I do for you. It's all about us. We are talking inward, about me. Here is the overview of the lesson. Point number 1, overcoming negativity bias. The idea that you remember only negative behavior and forget about positive. Point number 2, overcoming fundamental attribution error. How to not judge somebody negatively as soon as at times for judgment. And number 3, a deep philosophical truth. Learning and discovering the human being that assists us in living a better life in both when we face both conditions. So I'm going to ask you a question. If I told you that you're born with negativity bias, it's an inborn trait, do you think it's possible to change it or not? Yes. How?
Being aware of.
Being aware of it. And doing what?
Taking the time to evaluate the situation and.
So somebody was very kind, gave you a ride, offer you a ride to the store for 4 days. One day he says to you, today I have no time. How would you, and you think this guy is a jerk because my neighbor, he goes to the store anyway. What's wrong with him? How would you react? How would you? Yes, Ron.
You think of saying, you know, I'm disappointed that you can't help me today. I'm sure you must have a good reason, and thank you for all the other times you helped.
Very good. You're right on target.
What's experience?
He's
Experience.
speaking of experience, I'm sure. So what we are going to talk about is changing our character. I'm going to show you a very short introduction. I think it's very powerful. Rambam, Maimonides' rule about day-to-day life, tells us that in every aspect of our life, we must follow the middle road. Don't be an overspender. Don't be too stingy. Don't socialize too much. Don't segregate yourself from society. In every part, eating habits, socializing, in every aspect of life, middle road, a little bit, not too much, not too little, not too much. What happens? This is text number 3. What happens if I have a character flaw? For example, I like to scream. I am very impatient. I don't have patience to listen to people. I like to control, whatever it might be. Rambam tells us that if you are weighing over in one side, you must take the other extreme. If you take the other extreme, it will balance the situation. Did I make myself clear? Here it is in a nice slide. What happens if I'm very stingy? If I am always out there socializing, doing too much of something? Says Rambam, take the other extreme. Stay away from people for a long time. Keep your mouth shut even when you speak, you're supposed to speak in a pleasant way. What happens is when you do that, when you take the other extreme, it will balance and it will train you to conduct yourself properly. In other words, like Ruth and Ron mentioned, but in Kabbalistic terminology or in Maimonides' word, the behavior can influence my character. If I am very quick to respond without thinking, if I raise my voice, if I'm always late, if I like to sleep late, I can change my character by behaving in the other extreme. What happens if I behave to an extreme? It will go back to my heart and brains and change my character. Is that clear? That's text number 3 and 4. Rambam says, if I like to spend a lot of money and comes the end of the month, I have to borrow. And my wife or my family is screaming because they always have to support me. I have to learn to act differently to the other extreme, not spend anything. And then over time, I will balance it off. So my act will force my character. Why is it important? Because if I know, and we all do, and I'm not speaking particularly about each one of you, but about myself, that we have negativity bias, which means we're leaning in our character always to remember the negative behavior of other people that we relate to. We need to learn to have positivity bias, which means always finding the positive with somebody and expanding it, have a bias in positivity. Speak about how kind they are. Speak and exaggerate, as we'll find out. Take the extreme about how kind the person and how much time he's devoting and how good he is to me. This way, when there is a negative behavior, it will be forgotten and I will not have not much about it. Before we read examples from the Talmud, I want to share with you a story of the Rebbe. The Lubavitch Rebbe literally adopted a young man who had traveled, left Russia, and with his parents, they lived in Israel, but he went to the Rebbe in 1952. And the Rebbe took on to him like a father, because his father and mother were in Israel and they couldn't assist him. Came time for marriage, they assisted this Russian boy to find, the Rebbe helped them find an American girl that was born in Pittsburgh, a real complete American girl. You can imagine a Russian boy that would have left Russia as a teenage, 5 years later, 7 years later, is meeting a Russian girl, American girl. He needed a lot of training and a lot of learning how to. So a year after he's married, the Rebbe sent him to Italy, to Rome, to be the Rebbe's emissary. Later he became all of Italy. A year after he's in Italy, he wrote the Rebbe a letter. And in the letter, towards the end, he's praising his wife. He says that she's a great cook. She don't go to sleep unless the house is clean. As not only taking care of the kids, but also taking care of the community. She's always there if people ask her to teach Torah. And he goes on and on and on. Towards the end, he says, maybe, he writes down to the Rebbe in a letter, and I have the letter. Maybe I have taken too long to express my wife's good traits. In other words, he's not sure, perhaps he took too much time, too much space. The Rebbe in return sent them back the letter, and the word maybe, the Rebbe crossed that line, maybe. And under the word, I have taken too long, I've taken long to express my wife's traits. Under taken long, the Rebbe underlined that. He put a very big line, meaning, underline, meaning that there needs to be a lot more. So what the Rebbe, the man was not sure whether he did enough. The Rebbe told him not only he did not do enough, but he has to do a lot more. That's called positivity bias, where we find an excuse to praise somebody we're in a relationship. We learn to verbalize and pay attention to the details, even if perhaps we don't see them directly, but we think that perhaps they are there. As we'll discover, here is an example from the Medrash, and then I'm going to show it you an example from the Talmud. Text number 4. Ina, can you read, please? I don't think they asked me to.
It is related that when a pious teacher passed the foul-smelling carcass of a dog, his disciples exclaimed, "How terribly this carcass smells!" This one. Whereupon the teacher replied, "How white are its teeth!" The students understood and regretted having disparaged the carcass. Consider, if it is improper to speak despairingly of an animal carcass, all the more so of a living human. The reverse is also true. If it is proper to praise an animal carcass for the whiteness of its teeth, how much more so is it our duty to praise a human, a being endowed with intelligence and understanding. With his retort, the teacher intended to teach his disciples to avoid discussing the negative, lest the habit become part of their nature. Instead, through habitually mentioning the positive, it would become part of their nature to speak positively.
So this book is about training a human being to conduct himself properly. And he brings a story. The teacher is passing by in the street, and they see a dog, a carcass of a dog. And the students remarked how awful the smell that comes out. And the teacher remarked, he says, "Look at the dog, how white are his teeth." And they took from it the lesson that instead of focusing on the negative aspect of what they see, concentrate on the positive. Find something positive, even though it's a smelly carcass. By doing so, it will train us to think positively about a human being. If we always train to think positive about a small, smelly animal, how much more so about a human? And we have a story in the Talmud. I'm going to show it you just a short introduction to the story. We're talking about a guest who is invited for a dinner. At a friend learned that his friend is visiting town. He invites him for a dinner. You have two styles of humans. You have the augmenter, the one who likes to exaggerate and add, and you have the reducer, the one who tries to minimize the act. Each one of them, the Talmud is not telling us who is lying. When they're not necessarily lying, they may both describe the truth. Each one is concentrating on a different dimension or different part of the event that took place. So he came out for dinner. He was invited for dinner. He was served a very tasty wine and a nice piece of bread. Also, he was served a nice meal, meat, chicken, whatever it is. Afterwards, when time comes to praise or share about the experience, the augmenter is praising and going way far beyond. The reducer is going far below. He's trying to minimize the act. Here it is, the story number 5. Ivan.
Ben Zoma used to say, what does a good guest say? My host extended himself remarkably for me. Look how much meat he brought before me, how much wine he set before me, how many fine rolls he laid out before me. My host did this all just for me. What does the bad guest say? Can I consider this host as having extended himself for me? All I ate was one piece of bread. I ate just one slice. I drank just one cup. If this host exerted himself, it was only for his own wife and children. With regards to the good guest, the verse proclaims, he remembers to augment what he has done, singing people praises. Job 36:24. With regards to bad guests, it is stated, people therefore fear him.
Let me summarize what we studied. Ben Zoma was a great sage. He says there is a man who is invited for dinner. If he is a reducer, if he likes to minimize the good, when he goes out to describe his experience, he will say, I don't think that he went out of his way. No big deal. He already prepared dinner for his family anyway. And besides, all I ate is one little piece of chicken and a little bit of wine. Anyway, he would have thrown it away because he already had to prepare for his family. He already had to open a bottle of wine for his family. If I wasn't there, he anyway would have wasted it. So there was no expense. And he did it for his own benefit so that I can say thank you to him. That's a reducer. An augmenter turned around and says, you know, I am sure this man never spent so much money and so much effort for a regular weekday dinner. The reason he did it is just because of me. Look how much he went out of his way to serve such a tasty meal just for me. All his family has enjoyed a better meal because of me. By the way, if you pay attention, the augmenter, the one who exaggerates to positive, speaks about the entire meal. He says, look about the meal. He went in a whole chicken and a whole bottle of wine and a whole loaf of bread. The reducer is talking about what he ate. All I ate is a slice of bread, and I got a piece of meat, and I got only a cup of wine. In other words, is somebody lying? The answer is no. But if I want to have a positivity bias, I need to find the positive in every act. Instead of concentrating on the meal that I was served, I need to bias and talk about the entire meal. He did the meal just because I was invited to his house. Otherwise, his family would have not enjoyed such a good meal. We go out of our way to speak positive about every act that happens, and not just because of a mere chance or any way he had the extra food for me. Is that clear? Did I make myself clear?
Is it optimist and pessimist, right?
It's more than optimism. It's no appreciation for all the good, and instead minimizing it. That's very similar to negativity bias. Positivity bias, there is a lot more to the story. You just don't have time. You're going to hear another story that is much more shocking. But there is a lot more to this story, and that is, you start talking about behind the scene. His wife probably cleaned the floor just because they knew that I'm coming. They are serving in real china. Usually they would serve in paper good. In other words, you are going to exaggerate. That's what Ben Zoma is talking about. In other words, if I want to counteract, to fight negativity bias, I have to find positivity in the relationship in ways that I don't even see, I cannot point out that it's for sure happened, but I should assume that that's what happens. And then I guarantee you, if it wasn't tasty or wasn't big enough a piece of meal, we would still be 100% appreciative for what we received, as opposed to the reducer. Larry, did you want to say something?
I was just saying, gonna say that we should all strive to have a character of a bee versus a fly. I don't know if you heard that, example or not, but they both fly. But whenever you release a bee, it will find a flower. If you release a fly, it will find something that's decaying.
Okay, I hear you.
I mean, they're both fly and everybody.
They both are going to go
But
somewhere.
everybody has a different character, so if we want to find something good in somebody else, we will. But if we're looking for something negative, we'll find something negative. as well.
Right. So I'm here to add to it that as humans, we are negativity bias. We are biased. We will find flaws. We will concentrate on the flaws. We will remember the flaws.
So it's more of a
And
fly.
according to Rambam, you can change that to become a bee. I didn't say that, but you change it to become a bee by acting, verbalizing, in action. For every small positive that person does, exaggerate and talk about it to as best as you can. And this way, you will not be paying attention to the negative because your trait, your character will change. Yes. Unfortunately. It's unfortunate.
They don't see anything.
I hope they're happy in their relationship. Yes.
They say you can actually, it's actually like retraining your brain, like to do a grateful journal where you sit down every day and you write 4 or 5 things that you are grateful for, and you do it every single day without fail. You actually trigger and change something in your brain to see the good and to be grateful for stuff.
You're right on target. And this is what my manager is talking about. The character can be mended or retrained based on our action. Writing is action. In other words, once you become grateful, you let go of the negativity. So you have the reducer, he diminishes the favor, and he says the man who feared, if he will not invite me, it's because I will hold it against them, or everybody will know that he's not a good host. The augmenters is magnifies the favor. He says they served us with China. I'm sure they didn't serve, they have dinner with China dishes last night. I'm sure they didn't have such a good wine the night before. And out of love, he did it because he loves me. Otherwise, he wouldn't invite me. In other words, they find examples or reasons to praise and speak about the positive. So if I have a sibling, I have children, and they reach out or they spend time or whatever they do, I always think that they go out of their way and they're doing an extraordinary job. And in this way, in verbalizing it, it will assist that whenever there is a negative, and it does happen, they are abrupt, they didn't show up, they did not deliver on their promise, I still have the relationship and I still have the connection because there's so much positive in the relationship between me and them. So this is positivity bias. I want to get into what do you call it? Fundamental attribution error, the second one. So again, here is a summary. According to Mishnah and a lot of teachings of our sages, when someone acted inappropriately, you are able to find many, many good reasons. The environment they were raised, they have internal temperaments, there is all kinds of reasons that you can use as a reason for the misbehaving. If I am training myself for a positivity bias to always exaggerate the good that a person does for me, it will fight back the negativity bias and will shrink it and be able to not hurt the relationship. Here is a summary. Dwell on the virtues. Anytime you have an opportunity, they are getting up with you, they smile at you, they offer some help, they call you and ask how you're doing because they care, because they love me. So when you dwell on the virtues, you will be able to forget about the negativity. In addition, you have the augment benefits. Anytime they do something for me, find reasons that are not on the surface. I shared with you. Somebody is inviting me for dinner. I say to myself, they went out of their way. Probably they had a movie to watch and they skipped that because of me. Probably they served me with China instead of paper good just because they care. By doing so, speaking and viewing them in such a positive way, if something did not work out, it will be totally gone. And now we're going to talk about fundamental error and negative. What do you call it? Fundamental? Fundamental attribution error. Here is a story. The Talmudic story, it's a very famous story, has a lot of questions. I'm going to share with you an introduction to the story. In ancient times, people did not work in the community where they lived in. There was not enough work in the village or in the town. So they used to travel far, hire themselves for a year, 2, 3 years, and amass a nice, good living, and then come back, spend a couple of months with their families, and then live back. There was a man who hired himself for 3 years. The Talmud does not share his name. Some of the commentators say it was Rabbi Akiva before he became a famous rabbi. And what the story is about, hiring himself for 3 years. It doesn't say what job he did. Could be that he was teaching the Torah to the children of that man, or he worked as a CPA, accountant in his farm. Who knows what? Here is the story, the way the Talmud tells us. Text number 6a. Ruthie, can you read? Page 156.
A fellow once traveled south from the Upper Galilee and was hired by a landowner for a 3-year term. On the eve of Yom Kippur, the Galilean asked his employer, "Give me my wages so I can go and feed my wife and children." The employer replied, "I have no money." The employee rejoined, "In that case, give me my wages in the form of produce," to which the employer insisted that he had none. "Give me my wages in the form of land," he pressed, but the employer replied that he owned no land. "Give me animals," "I have none." "Give me cushion and blankets," "I have none." The worker slung his tool over his shoulder and left for home in anguish.
What's the story? A man worked for 3 years. At the end of 3 years, he's going back home just before Yom Kippur to spend the holiday, another 2, 3 a month, 2 with his family. He's looking for the wages for 3 months. For 3 years, he worked. He comes to the owner, to the farmer, to the employer, and says, "Give me money." And the guy says, I have no money. I ran out of money. So he said, "Okay, give me produce. You have fields. You have wheat. You have oranges. You have guavas. You have avocados. Let me have it. I can go to the flea market, sell them, and have some money." He has to go buy candies for his children and shoes and buy food and celebrate with his wife and family. The man said, "I'm sorry, I don't have." So he said, "Give me land." He owned a large piece of many properties. And the guy says, "I ran out. I have no property. So give me cushions, give me your pillows, give me blankets, something I can sell in the flea market." He says, "I'm sorry, I have none." 5 requests he did. 5 different requests to which the owner said, "I have none." What would you do in that case? Yes, Ron.
I would ask the owner, what can you do?
And if he says, "I have none,"
Of
he
anything,
said, "I have nothing."
nothing of nothing.
Nothing. I got nothing. You want my socks? I have nothing. What?
You take him as a slave.
You take him as a slave. You take him to court. Will you lose your temper?
What is 3 years of your life?
Well, you should have explained, you should have, you should have given the.
I'm not asking, okay, I'm asking you what the hired employee should do, not what the employer. There's a lot of questions about the employer that are very difficult to answer, which I'm not going to get into. I'm asking a simple question. The employee, if you're the employee, what would you do? Would you lose your temper? He's a debtor, no doubt, he admits. By the way, there is no dispute about their wages. There is no dispute that it's the time for him to get paid. And the man seemingly was very wealthy. He hired this guy. He owned land. He had a house. So what happens now? We have nothing.
That's fun.
What?
That's fun.
Again, that's
Have some cash, sell something.
right. You say he played in the market and he did not buy Bitcoin. He bought.
I mean.
He couldn't care less. He needed the money now because now he's going home. He wasn't home for 3 years. It was dangerous to cross the road to the county line. So he was going home now for Yom Kippur and Sukkot, Simchat Torah, and Hanukkah. That's it. After Hanukkah, he's going to be hired, not by this guy. I would have stopped.
Been there for 3 years, or
Yeah.
He's good in the first one. He just might not come back.
It says 3 years.
Well, no, he hired him for 3 years.
Yeah.
But how do we, it says on the eve of Yom Kippur.
He says to him,
on
and
the eve of Yom Kippur 3 years later. So.
he says to him, give me my wages and I'll go and support my wife and children. This is after 3 years. There's no doubt. You can't break the contract. There's no breaking the contract. I need you to understand. I'm glad that you pointed it out because there is no dispute that he owed him the wages for 3 years. There is no dispute that he did a good job. There is no dispute that this is the time for him after 3 years. There's no dispute over that. And yet, he asked for five times, he asked different ways of paying, and yet he denied him. Here it's 6b. Ron, can you read 6b? Page 158.
Break the story.
Breaks
the story. The story is more than that.
Keep going,
Yeah.
right? What if he?
Stay.
It's 3 years. After 3 years, you cannot stay there. He also told his wife, in 3 years' time, I'll be back. And she keeps borrowing and borrowing. He needs the money there is a plan here. He has to follow through. The employer agreed to it. There was no dispute about how much money he should get paid. It's all clear. There's no gray line. Ron, can you read text number 6b, please?
After the festival, the employer took the workers' wages in his hand and set off for the workers' home. He took 3 donkeys, the first laden with food, the second with beverages, and the third with assorted delicacies. After they ate and drank together, the employer handed him his wages. The employer then asked the Galilean, tell me, when you requested your wages and I replied, I had no money, what did you suspect? Responded the employee, I told myself that perhaps the opportunity to purchase merchandise inexpensively had just presented itself, and you purchased it with the money you had, and so you had no money available. And when you requested animals and I said I had none, what did you suspect? Replied the employee, I told myself that perhaps the animals are rented to others. When you asked for land and I claimed to own no land, what did you suspect? Perhaps the land is leased to others. And when you asked for produce and I said I have none, what did you suspect? Perhaps they are not time. And when I insisted that I owned no cushions or blankets, what did you suspect? Perhaps it consecrated all its property to heaven.
Wow.
This is what we call fundamental attribution error in positivity. The guy is asking for money, and the owner, the landlord said, I have no money. And he says, maybe you lost everything in a bet or in a business transaction. Give me land. I have no land. Maybe you lost all your land and it's not yours. You listed from somebody that you cannot give me its payment. Give me produce. Maybe all the produce is already sold at the beginning of the season to somebody else. He always continuously judged the person in a favorable way. I'm asking you, if that man walks into the house 3 days later, and his wife spoiled the soup, how do you think his reaction be? In a positive way. How do you know? Because that's the way you are.
Came home with no money.
No, because
It also says that he left it.
in other words, that shows, just a minute, it shows us the character. I'm concentrating on the employee, not the employer. His character, because the employer had done much wrong. There is much more beneath the surface you don't even realize that he's done wrong, that you got to study Torah to realize how wrong it was. It's a sin. What it is a sin upon sin, but it doesn't matter. We are concentrating on the employee. The employee's judging, fundamental attribution error here is the utmost positive. So when someone is reacting or does something wrong towards them, he will always find a favorable purpose or reason and never judge him inappropriately. So if someone's cutting through the lane, he's going to say, this man probably is running to emergency room. It will come to him naturally. I want to share with you a story from the Rebbe. Yes, Paige.
It also says that the employee left in anguish. He didn't leave in anger.
Right.
So he took it, it's almost like he took it upon himself rather than blaming the person. He said, I'm sad.
In other words, he was extremely upset because he was expected to come home with boatload of money, and he came with empty pockets. But there wasn't for the anger against the employer, because he figured there must be a good reason. I want to show you a story. It's more about negativity bias. There was a man in the 50s that traveled in New York and he passed by early in the morning to a small synagogue. And in that small synagogue, he looked to pray. He walked in to pray the morning prayer, and there was a Torah reading, and there was not enough men. There was only 8 other men. There were 9. You need to have 10 for a minyan. So as he got a little upset, somebody says, don't worry. Somebody always come to assist us with a minyan. Sure enough, a man walks in with a newspaper, at times a New York Times, sat down in the back and started reading the paper. Refused to pray, refused to put on tefillin and be part of the community. He was just sitting reading the paper. The man was very, very upset when he saw that this man was so obnoxious. So he wrote to the Rebbe that in that town, in that synagogue, could be the rabbi or the Chabad rabbi, there was a man that he can't stand it. Russian Jews, when they see somebody misconduct, they must correct them. They must tell them the way they are. So he had to make sure that it's wrong. And he asked the Rebbe to reprimand that man. In response, the Rebbe returned a letter that's printed in the Rebbe's letters. The Rebbe says quite the opposite. It shows you the depth of the Jewish soul. This man did not care about prayer, does not believe in tefillin, but when he saw there are another 9 Jews who need help to pray, he feels so needed that he's going to be sitting there. Even though prayer is not his cup of tea, tefillin is not something he does. He brings his newspaper, but he goes out of his comfort to assist a fellow Jew. In other words, the fundamental attribution error, in order for me to fight it, it must be to an extreme in a positive way. And that's the Rebbe's attitude. Here, let's see what happens, number C. Andre, can you read? Why not? I'll bring you a book. We have a book. In the office, in the brown, where the envelopes are, you'll see 2 books, I think. Okay, can you read 6C?
I swear that was so. I have made a vow concerning of my property, consecrating in the temple. I did this because I was upset at my son, Hyrcanus, for not engaging in Torah study, and I thought to disinherit him. When I later come to the stage of the town, they believed all my vows.
Yeah, go ahead, continue, I'm sorry.
As for you, just as you judge favorably, so my God judge will follow.
The employer turned to the employee and say to him, exactly the way you thought is what happened. I actually consecrated, donated to God all my assets because I didn't want my child to receive any of my property because he didn't study Torah. But then I realized I made a mistake, so I went to the rabbis and they were able to, so to say, we call it breaking or annulling the vow. So when you ask me for our wages, in my safe, I had enough gold bars to pay you. And the properties you saw, one of them can cover all the expenses. I could have given you powders, I couldn't give you pillows and sheets, but it wasn't mine, it belonged to God. It's supposed to be sold and given to the Holy Temple. And that's why I said to you, I don't have any. The story the Talmud is teaching us is that when you have an experience with someone you're relating to, and they act in a very strange way, negative way, inappropriately, you need to train yourself to judge them favorably. Fundamental attribution error in a positive way. And it goes on and on, but I want to get to the next one. Is that clear? So again, just to summarize, I don't want to go over and over and over. Naturally, you don't have either a book. Gloria, you don't have a book?
I have the paper ones, but it's
from lesson
paper.
1.
You're gonna share.
We have a book. We are born in our DNA for negativity bias. If I have a relationship with you and I do 4 good things and one time I didn't do something good, you'll remember the negativity. How do we fight it? Positivity bias. Whenever you do something good for me, I should express my gratitude. I should think about it, expand, augment, exaggerate, and look for hidden parts of that positive that I don't even see, it's not revealed, but I should assume that you went through to do that good. Fundamental attribution error tells us that before you judge somebody, before you rule about somebody, try to rule in the most positive possible way. So if someone is late to a meeting, first thing you want to say is he's always late. Second thing you want to say, he has no respect for me. But the Jewish way is to say to yourself, he probably got stuck in traffic. And the next time he's late, it's because his car must have broken down. And the next one is because his wife needed his help with fixing the toilet. And you find every excuse in the book. What happens is you train yourself. What's the difference? If you judge people favorably, and you are positivity biased, you connect with people on a much higher level. Because when they do wrong, someone is late, and you forget about it and move on, because you say to yourself, it must be a good reason they did it. And still, I remember all the times that he's on time. That person wants to reciprocate. It's called a reflection. Your reflection in a mirror and in face of the water, the way you reflect towards others, that's how they reflect. So you end up connecting with them. I want to move on to the next point. I have a question for you. Is a zebra black with white stripes or white with black stripes? Anybody? It's a good question. Thank you. Why? They're predominantly white? You see over here, this is a picture from a zebra. Is there more black or more white? I'm talking about light purple is white and dark purple is black. So,
Black, right?
in Gaza, they had a zoo, but they couldn't afford animals. So they did different animals. For a zebra, they took a small donkey, they painted white, and then they put. It's true. I have this picture of that zebra.
I think you'd have to count the stripes, and whichever one is the predominant number, that's what's.
But you don't know where to start. Which one you count? The white stripes or the black stripes?
White and black stripes. Or black stripes.
We are moving into a philosophical understanding of the human being. And in order for us to get there in a quick way, we learn a little bit about a zebra. So, Paige, it's your turn. Text number 8.
Robert, does the Talmud say which is more white?
We'll
and
find,
black?
of course, let's find out.
Oh, wow. I asked the zebra, are you black with white stripes or white with black stripes? And the zebra asked me, are you good with bad habits or are you bad with good habits? Are you noisy with quiet times? Are you quiet with noisy times? Are you happy with some sad days? Or are you sad with some happy days? Are you neat with some sloppy ways? Or are you sloppy with some neat ways? And on and on and on and on and on and on he went. I'll never ask a zebra about stripes again.
Smart as zebra. This one. It must be Jewish.
So,
Funny relation to my kids.
am I a good person with bad behavior? Or am I a bad person with good behavior? And the answer is, don't ask. But Kabbalah teaches us that we have two souls, the godly soul and the animal soul. I'm giving you a concentrated point. You'll get to the point much faster. We are made out of two souls, the godly and the animal. One of them is always running the show. The question is, which one is me? The animal soul, the godly soul. Those of us who have been to Tanya, and I think in lesson 2 we spoke, that majority of time, the animal soul is in charge, is my identity. How do I know? Because when we wake up in the morning, we say, God, Elokai, Neshama shenatata bi, the soul you place in me, Torah is pure. In other words, me exists, and you placed a soul in me. So me is the animal soul, and you placed a godly soul in me. So who am I? Animal soul with a godly soul. But that's not the case. Kabbalah tells us that the real essence of a human is the godly soul. And here is the proof for it. What's the distinction? What's the difference between an animal and a human? The only distinction is the godly soul. Every human being possesses a godly soul. Animals do not have a godly soul. Human has animal soul, animals have an animal soul. What puts us above animal kingdom? The godly soul, not the animal soul, because otherwise I'll be like every other animal. What gives me the right to slaughter an animal for consumption? Not for fun. It's inappropriate, it's against God's rules. But if I am hungry and I am following kosher law, I am Jewish, I have to slaughter only certain animals. Who gave me the right to fish, to go fishing? Who gave me the right to kill? Who gave me the right to kill a non-kosher animal for its hide? Where is it coming from? The only reason is just the animals are above the vegetation kingdom and they're allowed to eat on grass and eat fruits and trees because they are above them. Human is above animals. If me is an animal soul, I'm no different than another animal. The fact that I walk on 2 feet, there are apes who walk on 2, there are kangaroos, there are plenty of animals that walk on 2 feet. What makes me superior to animals? The only answer is godly soul. When God says, let us make man in our image, and he created Adam and Eve, he placed part of God in that creature, and that sets him apart. So if you want to know who am I am in essence a godly soul that has an animal soul. Now, who is the loudest? Who is running the show most of the time? The animal soul. It's much louder, and it enters into the body at birth. The godly soul will enter only 13 years later. It takes a while before the godly soul enters. The one who rules most of the time for most of the people is the animal soul. But it doesn't mean that this is who am I. I am the zebra I am black with white stripes. I am a godly with animal soul. Do you understand that? So what happened if someone cheated me? If someone lied to me? It's the animal soul that acted, not the godly soul. So when I say to that person, you're good, and I'm sure you did it because of bad habits, or because the way you were raised, or because of your social environment, or because you had no choice, or because you thought you're never going to get caught, it is judging the person based on the godly soul, realizing the godly soul is pure and good. Therefore, when I judge somebody favorably and I always find a good excuse, I'm not cheating anybody. I'm not making up stories. I'm not faking it. I'm actually reaching to the core of their very existence, because that's what defines a human being. Did you understand that? There are many texts that leads to that point. I just feel like we should do it in that way so we can finish at a good time. In other words, when you fundamental attribution error, when you did something wrong and I judge you favorably and I say, maybe you ran out of line, maybe you got stuck in traffic, maybe because you were preoccupied with something else, so you didn't pay attention when you were cooking and you overcooked. I am not making it up, even if I use the same excuse tomorrow and the next day and over and over. You know why? Because all the bad behaviors stem from the animal soul, and that's the black stripes on a white background. The background, the real true me, the person I'm dealing with, is a godly soul. The godly soul don't want to cheat. The godly soul don't want to lose temper, don't want to lie. And therefore, when I say, I'm sure you don't want to do it, I'm sure you had an external result, I'm not making up a story, I'm telling the truth. There is one very, very fascinating point. The previous Rebbe says that every human being, in addition to knowing their faults, they must know their personal positive traits. The Rebbe dissects it and says that the Rebbe says you must know the faults, not your faults. But when it comes to traits, he's saying your traits. And the reason is because your essence is godly soul. So the traits, the positivity is your essence. The faults is not yours. It's added to you. It's the animal soul, the stripes, the black stripes or white stripe on top of the background, the essence of who you are. I hope I made this point clear. Any questions?
Lesson 4.
That's why when Mashiach will come, the Torah tells us that he will sniff, you will smell the person and judge based on smelling. Anybody heard that? It's in the Bible. It's a text in the Bible. The Bible says Here it is, Isaiah, text number 11a. I'm going to read it and explain it. Neither with sight of his eyes shall he judge, nor with the hearing of his ears shall he reprove. Instead, it continues on, with the smell of his nose, he will be able to judge. And the rabbis are asking, what is it? It's talking about the future Mashiach. And the rabbi explains that when you judge, a judge today in court, a rabbi or a judge, they judge based on the evidence, what they see. They are not allowed to go below the surface. So when they see someone robbing a bank, they see someone who behaved very badly and they have to punish that person. Mashiach, on the other hand, will look into the core of the person. And by looking to the core, realizing that fundamentally he's a very good person because he possesses godly soul. It's the animal soul that was added. And therefore, he will smell, meaning he will get into the essence. And therefore, what he did was because he was motivated by his animal soul, not him. And you'll be able to forgive him. Today, you're not allowed to for a judge. Let's get to the summary.
Lesson 4. The art of positivity. 1. We possess the freedom to act in defiance of our biases and tendencies. By doing so repeatedly and consistently, we gradually steer ourselves toward healthier attitudes. 2. We alter our negativity bias by becoming radically profuse in describing the virtues of the people connected to us. We battle this bias even more fundamentally by training ourselves to search for the beauty and positivity in all things. 3. When someone benefits us, in addition to focusing on this virtue, it is also advisable to augment the virtue by assuming that it required much effort and that it is a result of the benefactor's genuine kindness. 4. The Torah regards our essence to be the godly soul, even if our animal soul speaks louder and has more influence on our daily choices. We are good with bad habits, not bad with good habits. When we tap this truth, it makes sense to dwell on another person's virtues instead of their vices and to augment their good rather than reduce it. 5. We overcome the tendency to commit attribution errors by relating stories of those who excelled in judging favorably, which makes us conscious of the problem and motivates us to overcome it. Practically, when a cynical attribution surfaces, ask yourself whether there is a reasonable circumstantial explanation that is worth accommodating. 6. Even when unique circumstances are not the cause for misbehavior, we can judge favorably by taking into account the wrongdoer's disposition and surroundings, acknowledging that under similar pressures, we might have acted similarly. This empathetic perspective does not justify wrongdoing, but it eliminates our own undeserved sense of superiority that generates discord. 7. The Torah regards our essence to be the godly soul. It is therefore logical to attribute failings to an extra challenging animal soul or another circumstantial cause. 8. To truly appreciate the soul in others and regard it as their primary identity, we must prioritize our own soul's importance within our own lives. You could not reach deeper within another than you reach within your own self.
And next week, we hope to see you all. We will discover the art of influence. How can I influence someone to change their behavior? How can I criticize? How can I talk to somebody about their misdeeds? Thank you very much. And we'll see you next week.